All right, so up to this point, we have learned Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. We've gone through a whole lot of information. Some of the things we've gone through, we're like, oh, I remember this from 4th grade, or I learned that in 3rd grade, or yeah, we learned this last year. I've got this. This is pretty easy. Some of it was like, well, I remember my teacher introducing it to me, but I didn't really quite get it. So if I learn it now, I'll be better at it. All of these key concepts, including what we're getting ready to get into in Chapter 3, is what we call foundation work. If you've never seen a type of image like this before, this is what underneath every good solid house looks like. This is called the foundation. They have footers and headers, which is everything that is in concrete and metal poles, and they show you the framework of what the house is going to look like before they put anything above ground. They have to have that foundation so it'll stand and it'll last. Once we have it, then we can build up, and we can make the house look like what it's intended to look like. So if we don't have a good, solid foundation, maybe we don't support it with dirt and packing it down underneath that ground, and we just kind of have it spread out. Or maybe we just got cheap as the builder, and we kind of skipped a couple blocks here or there. Then what we end up having is a partial house that's good, but the other part of the house that doesn't have a solid foundation, it begins to fall. There are people all over our country and all over the world that unfortunately, they don't get a solid foundation, and though part of it can stand nice and firm, other parts of it begin to collapse. As I get into Chapter 3, and once again, I am building my foundation. If I started today building you box plots, and especially inequalities and algebra, most of you, you're going to end up like this. Because we don't have a solid foundation to continue to expand upon. This information for Chapter 3 is going to seem really simple. However, what I need you to do is really apply yourself to learn it, because it's one of my basic building blocks that's going to make me successful. Not just this year when we get into the hard stuff, but next year. You may not remember exactly some of the things that I introduced you to, but in 7th grade they start saying, okay, we're going to review this, and then you're like, I remember Mr. B talking about that. Or, hey, he taught me about integers. I know how to use those integers now, and you can be successful from this point forward in your mathematical career. Those of you who your foundation so far, you've got most of your bricks there, but you're missing a couple. Then that's my goal, and that's what I'm trying to do this year by explaining those extra things, is filling in those extra blocks so your foundation can stand nice and firm. I just need you to work with me, and most of you, you're doing that. The rest of you, I think you're finally getting the idea that I'm trying to help you, and you're getting on board. The idea of integers. I keep using the word integers, but your book says positive and negatives. Well, mathematically, that's what an integer is. And integers are our positive and negative numbers, and they can look like all forms. But right now, we're going to use whole integers, all whole positive and negative numbers. And you may remember back, if you think back in your past, because it's been so long ago, you know, number lines going across the classroom. I know there's a couple classrooms in our building that are in the front of the room, some are in the back of the room where the board is. And it's that number line where you had 0 in the middle and everything to the right was positive and everything to the left was negative. That's what we're talking about as we begin Chapter 3. So please don't think, oh, I got this already, then I don't need to watch the video and I'm just going to do it, because there's a couple things that are going to be new that I introduce you to. So the idea that we're talking about is the positive and negatives. We're going to be looking at 0 because that's going to be our base measurement every time. When I look at this first scenario that they introduce us to as to what we're talking about, they suddenly throw this word opposite out at you. And we sometimes make opposites really difficult. Opposites aren't designed to be difficult. If I know it's not this, then it's going to be this other. And if it's not this, then, you know, it's kind of like the idea of thinking about a mirrored image where the mirror is the 0 and what's it going to look like on the opposite side. When I talk about this scenario, we're talking about a Major League Baseball game that happened in 2009 between the Colorado Rockies and the Philadelphia Phillies. They started their first game on a really cold day. It was 2 degrees Celsius. And they finished playing on a really cold day because it dropped down to -4 degrees Celsius. When I look at those temperatures there, they're saying, okay, well, what you do is know where those numbers are on a number line, but then what's the opposite of those two numbers? So let's start with, where is 2 going to be on my number line? Well, it's a 0 right in the middle, and I know that it's just a regular 2, so it's positive, it's got to be on the right. All of my positive numbers are always to the right of my 0, unless I do a vertical number line, which we'll see here in a couple of minutes. Then those are going to be up above. So if I think about its opposite, what's its mirror image going to be? Well, it wouldn't be like negative 15. It's just going to be that number, but I'm going to change the sign. So its opposite is going to be negative 2. I'm 2 spaces from 0, and therefore I have to go 2 spaces from 0 in the opposite direction. So the opposite of 2 degrees Celsius would be negative 2 degrees Celsius. In the same way, on that ending temperature, if it was negative 4 degrees, where would it be? Well, all of my negatives are to the left of my 0, so I know it has to be on the left-hand side. What would its opposite be? Well, I'm just going to take that negative away. If I went 4 steps from 0, I've got to go 4 steps from 0 also, but just in the opposite direction. So when I go in the opposite direction, then I'm going to end up on the 4. So the opposite of negative 4 degrees Celsius is 4 degrees Celsius. Not difficult, right? It's not intended to be. So here's the problem. As I mentioned before, I get a lot of students that I get them to this point and then they shut me off. I got this. Please don't do this. This isn't going to be a long video, okay? And I'm going to give you plenty of time to do your assignment. And yes, you have fewer or more than you usually do when it comes to the assignment, but they are easy if I truly get this foundational concept. So please, here's the key, and it's always the key. Make sure you're following along and paying attention, going step by step and engaged in what I'm saying, because I have to understand these, especially when I go to inequalities. Make sure you're listening. Your brain is engaged, you know what I'm saying, and your hand is therefore building that muscle memory and doing exactly what I'm doing as I'm going through it. All right? Are we ready? Because here I have some situations. Now, I whited these out because I know they're already filled into your book, but I need you to understand where these numbers come from. There's 2 parts to this assignment. These, I believe, are on your mid-chapter checkpoint, but I think they're also on your final test, and I leave them on there because it's a good way to make us think about what we're seeing in words for story problems compared to what we end up with answers. The first thing I have to do is I have to identify the integer that is in the math problem. The integer, once again, is the positive or negative number. The 0, our balance in the middle. How does it relate, or what would it be? What would be represented by this scenario that we're given? So it says a team loses 10 yards on a football play. So if we had the ball, it's hiked to the quarterback, the running back runs behind, grabs the ball, and hits somebody right on the line. Not a gain and not a loss, right? That's where my 0 is going to be. But if I get the handoff and all of a sudden someone comes after me and I take a couple steps backwards and I get tackled behind the line, that's a loss of 10 yards. So if I have a negative 10 yards when I'm going to name this integer, then I know I have the word loss. Loss is going to indicate negative. So it has to be a negative 10. The second half then, what is this, the 0 representing in this scenario? Well, it's like I said, if I get hit right on the line once I get the ball, I'm not gaining anything for the team, I'm not losing anything for the team, so it's just a 0. So I didn't gain or lose any yardage for the play. It's a waste of play. However, I didn't get any trouble by losing any of my yardage. And the second one then says, a point in Yuma, Arizona, and yes, that's a real place, is 70 feet above sea level. So on number lines where the 0's in the middle, okay, all of these are positive and all these are negative. Well, I turn my number line to go vertical to where the center point is 0, everything above is positive and everything below is negative. If I'm talking about sea level, it's right here in the middle. Sea level means exactly what it sounds like. Where the sea is, that's my level measurement. And if I have ground that's below sea level, then it just means the ground does go lower. And if it's above sea level, then it means it's rising above where the sea would be. In this scenario, then a key word that I'm looking at is above. And if it's above sea level, then I know that's a positive number. So I know it's a positive 70. Here's a little side note. If it's a positive number, I don't have to show my positive. I usually do, because when I get into doing my math with integers, if I get tricked up by not having a positive there, it gets a little confusing. It's not required to have a positive sign with a positive number, though. You've seen positive numbers ever since you began doing math. What would 0 be then? Well, I just explained what sea level was, and that 0 would have to be where sea level is. It's nice and straight. Not above and not below. All right, going through these a little quicker then. A temperature of 40 degrees below 0. So that's my key word, right? It's below 0. And I know if it's below 0, that has to be a negative number. And if it's a negative number, what number is it? Well, it's 40 degrees below, so it's got to be negative 40. And what would the 0 be represented in this scenario? Well, it's just going to be 0 degrees, right? The next one, Larry withdraws $30 from his bank account. Now, here's where they try to trick you a little bit. If I think about Larry, well, now Larry has 30 bucks in his pocket, right? Well, that's where the money ends up, and he could say, I have $30. We have to start where it began. If he's keeping all of his money for a purpose, say he wants to buy a new bike, and he keeps taking money out, he's not going to save up his account to where he has enough money for a bike. We're looking at where it begins at the bank. So is the bank going to show a positive or a negative? Well, if he withdraws, which is the key word, then the bank is going to show that he's negative $30 because he took it out of his account. Sure, it's his, but he's taking it away from where it's originally being kept. So what would the 0 be then? Well, the 0 would be, well, I didn't deposit any money in the bank, but I sure didn't take any money out of the bank, so I just left my money alone, right? It's the original balance of my bank account. On this one, Trisha's golf score was 7 strokes below par. Now, I know there's a couple people that know about golfing. Okay, they've been raised around golfing for quite a while. Some people, not so much. I've been golfing one time in my life, I'll be honest with you. Putt-putt golfing, probably a couple hundred times. But par is, in golf, whoever designs the golf course, then they tell you, okay, so if you tee off here and the hole is over there, it should take you 3 strokes to get from here to the ball in your hole. It may take you 6 strokes to get from here to the ball in the hole. So if you meet par, every single hole you actually met it, you got exactly what they said. So if the course overall is a 40 stroke course, you got a 40. Okay? If you're above, you got 47, that's not so good. Because if you're going above, then in golf, scores run just the opposite as most sports. The higher you are, the worse player you are. If you go below par, then you're doing better than what the people who designed the course thought you would do. So in this scenario, she is below, which is a negative. That's a good thing when it comes to golf because she would have a much better score. But the idea of it being below, that's our negative number. That's when we take our horizontal number line and we go vertical, and it's going to be below 0. So what would 0 be in this situation? Well, that would be just making par. I got exactly what the course designers thought I would get. And then on this one, we talked about atoms, and my one is still up over there. A chlorine ion has 1 more electron than proton. So now in this situation, we're not talking about is it a positive or negatively charged atom. We're just talking about the fact that I have 1 more electron, and 1 more is the key to this. So I have a positive number. If I had 0, then I would have the same amount of electrons and protons. It would be a neutral charged particle. Once again, on my atoms, because you need to know this for science, my protons and neutrons are in the center, and the protons are always positive charged. My electrons are in layers on the outside, and those are my negative charge. And that's what it's saying is, normally on a regular atom, I have the same number of protons and electrons, but sometimes we end up with what is called an ion, where my electrons get a little bit more than what my protons do. Tangent thought going on. All right, so now we got something that says the opposite of 3. Notice I covered up the first part because I feel like this is kind of set up differently because I have to understand what it said before they actually show me the wording. So I'm trying to solve for the opposite of 3. Mathematically, what that would look like is, well, what is the opposite of 3? Well, that would be negative 3, right? And therefore, what's the opposite of it? Therefore, I have a negative here. So this says, what is the opposite of 3 and the opposite of it? So it's the negative, in parentheses, negative 3. So let's go through these steps. It says to graph 3 on the line. All right, so where am I actually starting? Since we have all sorts of confusion by this wording, my 3 is going to start there. Now, I'm going to plot the opposite of negative 3. All right, so the opposite of negative 3, I'm 3 from 0. I got to go 3 from 0 to the left. That takes me to my negative 3. And now, plot the opposite of what you just did. So I'm going to plot back over here. So if this is my 3 and I go to negative 3, the opposite of negative 3 is positive 3. I end up with the exact same answer, right? So Einstein would say, so the opposite of the opposite is the same number. Why do they give it to us? All they're saying is, are you really understanding the way these numbers work? If I ask for the opposite of the opposite, I'm asking you to write down the exact same number. Should be easy answers for every single one of us. If that's the case, the opposite of the opposite is 3. What's the opposite of these? If it's the same number, then positive 9, well, the opposite would be negative 9. Going back would be 9. It's still positive 9. What about 12? If I'm at negative 12, its opposite is positive 12. If I go back, it's negative 12 again. Still the same number. And then when I get to 0, what? 0? Well, what's the opposite of 0? Well, there really isn't one, right? I'd be going up and down at the exact same point. So the opposite of 0, it's just 0. It's just going to stay the same. It could be the opposite of 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 0. It's still going to be 0. Wow. A little confusing, but once we see it, we can just say, they're just trying to trick me. It's just the same number. Moving on. Explain a plane's altitude changes from negative or by negative 1,000 feet. So the plane going up or down, and explain. So if I have a plane flying and I look at altitude, where it begins is going to be my 0 in this scenario. And if that plane begins to go down to negative 1,000, vertical number lines, the positives are always above 0, the negatives are always below the 0. So if I'm going to go down to 1,000, what is the plane doing? Well, the plane's going down. And how do I know? Well, if 0, where the plane is flying, and it changes by negative, it has to be going down. So on my number line, if the 0 is where the plane is flying, and it's going to negative 1,000, it has to be going down. So if you don't have that written down, pause the video and move on. All right, so graph the integer and its opposite on a number line. So I have 2 things on my number line, 2 points, and then I have to write down its opposite. That's a 3rd point. There's no work to show here. It's just 3 straight points to get. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plot the negative 7. So I look at my 0, and it's going to be here, right? Between the 6 and the 8, okay? And I know its opposite is going to just be that number with a different sign, so it's going to be positive 7. So I go to the negative 7. I know it's going to be between the negative 6 and the negative 8, because if I sit there and think about my counting numbers, I could do 5, 6, 7, 8. I know it has to be over here. Then my positive 7, well, it has to be between my 6 and 8, because I've been counting since before I joined the preschool classes, so I'm good to put it there. Well, what about having 9 and plotting it in its opposite? Well, what's the opposite of 9? Well, that'd be negative 9, right? It's the same number, just with a different sign. And then if I plot 9, it's got to be between the 8 and the 10, because when I count 8, 9, 10. So my point goes there. And then the same thing, when I go in the negatives, it's still got to be between the 8 and the 10, because counting, that's the way it goes. The only difference is it's going negative. So it's got to be there. Notice I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I just earned 6 points by doing those 2 problems. All right, so now what I want you to do is I want you to pause the video, and I want you to fill out this chart, and then unpause it once it's filled out. You only have 3 there, and let's see how you do. So hopefully you have 3 answers written down. You have 3 integers, and then you've told me what each of these scenarios represent. So Carrie gained 24 points during a round of a game show. Well, if she gained points, then that tells me that that keyword, it's going to be a positive number. We gained 24 points. What would 0 represent then? Well, 0 would represent that Carrie didn't score at all, right? She didn't gain any points, she didn't lose any points, she just stayed at a 0. Ben lost 5 pounds during the summer. If I've lost something, then I know I'm going down. Now, that's a positive thing for Ben. It's always good to be able to lose weight if you're a little too heavy, okay? But when we're just looking at flat numbers, I know that's a negative because it's going to be losing something. If I had a 0 in that scenario at the end of the summer, then Ben's weight would just stay the same. He wouldn't gain any weight, he wouldn't lose any weight. We're okay, we just stay the same. We maintain. The 5, then Marcy deposited $35 into her savings account. This is where we had to think, and hopefully you did, how I explained the last banking one. When he took the $30 and put it in his pocket, yes, he had a positive $30, but the bank said, yeah, you're negative 30 because you withdrew money. Okay? She is now going to put money in her account. So if we're looking at savings, then we have a positive number going into the account. So I have a positive 35. And if we didn't, then what would that look like? Well, once again, the original balance in the bank account would just simply stay the same. All right, so this shouldn't be difficult. If it is, if you're struggling, you're not quite getting into the positive, negatives, the opposites of the opposites, and so on and so forth, it's fine. It's what I'm here for. Come and ask me, we have these to work on. If you get it, then you're ready to move on. Yeah, there's going to be, 18 questions, but you'll be just fine. So it should be 2 through 13 because one's already done for you. And then you're going to have questions 1 through 6 from page 143 and 144. Don't let any of the wording trick you. Just pause, think about it, what it's saying. Don't try to rush through and get to the end and then not get the 100% that everyone should be getting on the assignment. If you have questions, just come and ask.